Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. But tonight we're not going to start out with a person, we're going to start out with a steer. That's right, a steer named Bevo. Bevo died recently. He was almost 14 years old, and he was the University of Texas mascot. He was actually Bevo the 14th. He was the 14th mascot that the Longhorns have had since 1916. And here's a little report on Bevo.
It's one of the most recognized mascots in college football. Bevo officially became the mascot of the University of Texas back in 1916, what was originally called Bo. His name did not become Bevo until a rival school forced the Longhorns to be creative.
As the story goes, Texas lost to Texas A&M 13-0. And they went and stole the steer from the University of Texas, and they branded the score of the game 13-0 on the side of the steer. Completed the brand by connecting the 1 and the 3 to make it a B, adding the rest of the E from the dash, adding the letter V, and then you had the 0, which became an O, and then became Bevo.
This is the 14th Bevo in school history. The one that had the longest tenure was handled by John Kinzer.
I had him when he was 3 years old, and he had a long and distinguished career, seeing a couple of championships, one Heisman Trophy for Ricky Williams. I think they retired Sunrise Express after 191 years.
Bevo is typically pretty easy to handle as long as nothing out of the ordinary takes place.
Well, they decided that they needed me to unload Bevo. And since we were late to the game, we had to send the rest of the guys up to tell them we're going to be late. But let's just say they checked Bevo's temperature. Bevo proceeded to flip me on my side with his horns.
I think he's trying to say there that Bevo didn't like getting a rectal. By the way, they say that Bevo died of bovine leukemia virus. Personally, I think he died after watching all this bad Texas football they've been playing lately. Poor Bevo just couldn't take it anymore. We're going to move on now, make a brief mention of Marty Ingles, who died recently at the age of 79. Marty Ingles was a really funny guy, very neurotic, but with a good heart, messed up for a lot of his life. He was a nice Jewish boy from Brooklyn. By the way, a little trivia, his uncle was Abe Beame, the mayor of New York in the 70s. He's best known for two things. Early in his career, he was teamed with John Aston in a sitcom that never made it, but was actually pretty funny, called I'm Dickens, He's Fenster. It was a comedy about two carpenters. He was Archfenster, German for architectural window, and he used to keep all the tools in his tool belt in alphabetical order. The series was created by Leonard Stern, whose podcast we've done right around the time he was creating Get Smart. As I said, it was a pretty good sitcom. It was actually a bridge between the sitcoms of the 50s and sitcoms of the 60s. John Aston moved on. Pretty soon after that, he became Gomez Addams in the Addams Family. Marty Ingles went to doing stand-up, but his career took a real hit when he was doing stand-up one night on the Johnny Carson show, and he suffered an acute bout of stage fright. Here's the intro to I'm Dickens, He's Fenster.
I'm Dickens, he's Fenster. Starring John Aston, Marty Ingles, with Emmeline Henry. Created and produced by Leonard Stern.
After that, he became not an agent in Hollywood, but a guy who could get to celebrities so that they could get projects, and that led to a lawsuit with June Allyson and her Depends commercials because he thought he should get a share of what she made on that, and she didn't, and he lost that lawsuit. The second thing that Marty Ingles was famous for was that he was married to Shirley Jones after Jack Cassidy died. I was always amazed at a straight arrow like Shirley Jones, marrying the librarian and the music man and the Partridge Family. She married two of the most whacked out guys in Hollywood, Jack Cassidy and Marty Ingles. And Marty Ingles may have been the less whacked out of the two. But by all accounts, they really loved each other. You can read about it in her autobiography. I'd like to move on and make a brief mention of George Mueller, who died recently at the age of 97. George Mueller was one of the main engineers for the Apollo and Gemini programs. He was a nice German boy from St. Louis, went to Purdue University. He was hired by Jim Webb in the early 60s. He was actually one of the men instrumental for putting men on the moon. He actually argued with Wernher von Braun about how to check the systems before the flights. He argued for an expedited all-up testing of a completed spacecraft instead of the more prolonged process of testing each individual component, like each stage of the rocket piecemeal, and eventually his opinion won out. And that allowed Apollo 11 to stay on the timetable of a decade that President Kennedy had set. You argue with Wernher von Braun about rockets, you must know what you're talking about. He was one of the supervisors of Apollo 1 in 1967 when there was a launch pad fire due to them using 100% oxygen, and it killed Ed White, Roger Chaffee, and Gus Grissom. He helped lead the investigation, and the program recovered, and they eventually went on to Apollo 11. which landed Neil Armstrong on the moon. Neil Armstrong, whose podcast we've done. George Mueller was very critical during his Apollo tenure of North American Aviation, one of the prime NASA contractors. North American Aviation was forced to make a lot of concessions during the rest of the Apollo program. Now, it's interesting that 6 months after Apollo 11 landed on the moon, George Mueller should have been a huge hero, and he left NASA for the private sector. Did he leave because of North American Aviation? Did he leave because of Washington bureaucracy, or just to make more money? One of those mysteries on these podcasts we never clear up. Well, we're going to move on to our feature, Emil Lewandowski, a.k.a. Cory Wells, who died recently at the age of 74. I've always had a soft spot in my heart for Cory Wells because he spelled his first name the same way I did, one of the few celebrities who did. Anyway, Cory Wells was one of the lead singers of Three Dog Night, along with Chuck Negron and Danny Hutton, and Three Dog Night was one of the most successful rock bands of the late 60s and early 70s. These guys were big. They had a bunch of number ones. They sold tens of millions of records. Some people criticized them for being a little too commercial. The rock critics of the early 1970s wanted more FM bands, but I have to tell you, Three Dog Night outlasted almost all those FM bands. Their music was good, and they popularized tunes from songwriters who might not have gotten recognition otherwise. They split up for a while because of some really bad drug stuff, especially Chuck Negron, whose autobiography was Three Dog Nightmare. But I have to tell you, from all accounts, it looks like Cory Wells pretty much stayed away from that stuff and had a pretty stable and happy family life. He was also the best looking of the three, and in my opinion, he was the best singer of the three. He broke in as the lead singer of a hip cult LA band in 1964 called The Enemies, who became the house band at Whiskey A Go-Go, and we'll talk more about them later. And in 1968, he paired up with Hutton and Negron. One of the guys they were thinking of taking on before they took on Danny Hutton, by the way, was Billy Joe Royal, whose podcast we just did the other week. Their name, Three Dog Night, came from a cold Australian winter where the Aborigines would huddle up with three dogs. I'm going to stick with songs where Cory Wells was the lead singer because you can see what a talented guy he was and all types of music that he could sing. And as I said, they gave prominence in the late 60s and early 70s to songwriters, some of whom made it very big later on. The song Cory Wells might be best known for is a Randy Newman song, and I've played this one as a closer before by Randy Newman, but the famous version is by Three Dog Night. Cory Wells does a great job on it. Mama told me not to come.
Want some whiskey in your water, sugar in your tea? What's all these crazy questions they're asking me? This is the craziest party that could ever be. Don't turn on the lights, cause I don't want to see. Mama told me not to come. Mama told me not to come. That ain't the way that I know.
That one was a big hit. This next one was not, but it might be the most influential song that Three Dog Night ever recorded. And the odds are you've never heard it before. There was a young songwriter knocking around LA in about 1970. English kid, he'd done a couple of demos, but none of them had gotten very far, and he was thinking of giving up songwriting and show business and getting a 9-to-5 job. But he had one song and he hooked up with Cory Wells. He asked Three Dog Night to sing it, and they were really big at the time in 1970. They put it on one of their albums, but they didn't release it as a single as a favor to him, to give his version a chance and him one last shot as a rock musician.
My gift is my song, this one's for you. And you can tell everybody this is your song. Maybe quite simple, but now that it's gone. I hope you don't mind, I hope you don't mind that I put down in words how wonderful life is while you're in the world.
Your Song. Yeah, that song pretty much propelled the young Elton John to superstardom, and everyone pretty much agrees that was one of the seminal records of the 1970s. Another songwriter Three Dog Night and Cory Wells helped out was Hoyt Axton, the great folk singer-songwriter. I love Hoyt Axton. He wrote my favorite Kingston Trio song, Greenback Dollar. He wrote my favorite Steppenwolf song, The Pusher Man. What a great song that is. He wrote the No-No song for Ringo. And he wrote one of Three Dog Night's #1 hits that Chuck Negron sang, Joy to the World. By the way, Hoyt Axton and his mother Mae Axton are the only mother-son combination to both have written #1 songs. Mae Axton wrote Heartbreak Hotel for Elvis. Well, the Hoyt Axton song that Cory Wells sang for Three Dog Night was I've Never Been to Spain, which is also a really good song.
Well, I never been to Spain, but but I kinda like the music. See, the ladies are insane there, and they sure know how to use it. They don't abuse it, never gonna lose it. I can't refuse it.
Hey, Cory Wells does a great job with that song. But maybe the song he did his best job with was an old standard, Try a Little Tenderness. And he modeled his version of it after Otis Redding's version of it. And we did Otis Redding's podcast a couple of weeks back too. You can really see Cory Wells' versatility here.
Ooh, she may be weary. Young girls, they do get weary, wearing that same old funky dress. But ooh, why she gets weary, weary. Won't you try some tenderness?
And Cory Wells did a nice rock love song with I Want to Serenade You.
I will serenade you all along the way. I will serenade you anywhere you say. Take you to the country, take you to the shore, show you to my garden. I know you make it grow.
And a lot of people, me included, think this is Three Dog Night's best song. It's a song written by Laura Nyro. A lot of people don't know who Laura Nyro was. She was a teenage genius songwriter performer in the mid-60s. One of the great teenage songwriters ever. She wrote for the Fifth Dimension, Wedding Bell Blues, and Stone Soul Picnic, and also Save the Country, my favorite Fifth Dimension song. For Blood, Sweat, and Tears, she wrote And When I Die. For Barbra Streisand, she wrote Stony End. When he was young, David Geffen realized what he had in Laura Nyro, and he tried to promote her, but for some reason it never clicked, and she died young. This was probably her greatest song.
Eli's coming, Eli's coming, Eli's coming, hide your heart, girl, Eli's coming, hide your heart, girl, girl, Eli's coming, hide girl, Eli's coming, hide your heart,
And Cory Wells did it for Three Dog Night, and it's a masterpiece.
Eli's coming, Eli's coming, Eli's coming, hide your heart, girl, Eli's coming, hide your heart, girl, girl, Eli's coming, you better hide, girl, Eli's coming, you better hide, girl, Eli's coming, you better hide, Eli's coming, hide your heart, girl, better hide your heart.
I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Tepps. And closing on Cory Wells, remember I said earlier on that before he was with Three Dog Night, he was the lead singer of a house band for the Whiskey A Go-Go in LA called The Enemies. This is 1965, right after the Beatles have made Hard Day's Night, and rock music is making it on primetime television. And The Enemies, as the house band at the Whiskey A Go-Go, are making it on primetime television, specifically on one of America's favorite programs, love to mock new trends, the Beverly Hillbillies. In one of the great memorable episodes of the Beverly Hillbillies called Hoedown A Go-Go, Jed sends Jethro and Miss Jane out to look for a band for a hoedown. They go to the Whiskey A Go-Go. Miss Jane has a little more on her mind than just a rock band, but they run into the Enemies, and they both get turned on. Here's a young Cory Wells from that episode singing Lightning Hopkins' Mojo Hand.
They started out at a place called Something A Go-Go.
This is rather wild, isn't it? Huh? I didn't expect it to be so frantic.
What'd you say?
Savvy. Primitive. It just won't do. It just grabs it.
I got a mojo